Heat sat heavy over Savannah, Georgia at the end of August, the kind that doesn't lift until midnight and doesn't apologize for it. And the street in the Cuyler-Brownville neighborhood was empty at 9 in the morning, except for a man in a county contractor's vest nailing a yellow notice to the door of a blue house on West Bolton Street, and, at the far end of the block, a black pickup truck that had just turned in. Sergeant Major Cole Briggs had not planned to stop in Savannah. He was driving through from Fort Stewart after dropping off his discharge paperwork, one last errand, heading north to his mother's house in Augusta. But Nola had pressed her nose to the windshield in the specific way that meant something was wrong before Cole had even processed what he was looking at. The woman who appeared in the blue house's doorway when the hammering started was small and white-haired, and she stood with both hands on the doorframe, looking at the notice being nailed to her own door with an expression that had moved past shock and arrived somewhere older and quieter. And what Cole Briggs discovered when he pulled into that driveway would expose a fraud that had been running against her for 2 years with the full cooperation of people who were supposed to protect her. If this is what you come here for, subscribe and stay with me through this one. Cole had joined the Marines at 19, straight out of Valdosta, because his older sister Denise had told him he needed structure, and because structure turned out to be the one thing the Marines gave in surplus. He served 22 years, 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, a final rotation training a partner force in an undisclosed location that he described, when family asked, as somewhere dry. He had been, by the time he separated, the kind of senior non-commissioned officer that units are quietly built around. The one who knew where the lines were before anyone drew them, who handled the ugly logistics that kept the mission honest, who received the news when the news was bad and figured out how to carry it to the people who needed to hear it. He came home to Georgia in the spring of 2024 and had spent the summer not knowing what to do with the silence of a life that no longer had a mission briefing in it. He drove. He ran in the mornings. He took Nola to the river. He waited for something to tell him what came next. Nola was a 6-year-old Catahoula leopard dog, blue merle coat, amber eyes, built like something designed for swamp terrain, which she was, historically, though she had never seen a swamp in her life, and seemed unbothered by this. She was 62 pounds of focused energy, and she had been Cole's constant since a VA adoption event in Valdosta 3 years earlier, where she had walked across a room of dogs and sat down directly in front of him and waited. In the specific way of a dog who has already made her decision and is simply waiting for the human to catch up. She communicated almost exclusively through position and stillness. When something was wrong, you could feel it before you could explain it. The quality of her attention changed, the way a radio signal changes when you're approaching the source. The woman in the blue house doorway was named Cecilia Drummond. She was 81 years old. She had lived on West Bolton Street for 47 years, had moved in as a young woman with her husband Roosevelt in 1977, when the Cuyler-Brownville neighborhood was the kind of place where people put down roots and intended to keep them. Roosevelt had worked for the city, water and sewer, 30 years, the kind of work that keeps a city running and that the people doing it mostly understand they will not be thanked for. He had died in 2009. Cecilia had stayed. She had been, for as long as anyone on West Bolton Street could remember, the center of something. Not officially. Not with a title, but in the way that certain people hold a neighborhood together by simply being consistently present. She cooked for families after funerals. She kept track of children whose parents were working double shifts. She organized the block's response to every city council decision that affected the neighborhood, which was most of them, because Cuyler-Brownville had the kind of history with its city government that required a person with Cecilia's specific combination of grace and persistence. She was a deacon at First African Baptist Church on Montgomery Street, had been for 21 years, and the church's relationship to the neighborhood flowed in part through her, the food pantry, the after-school program, the emergency fund that quietly paid utility bills for people who couldn't ask out loud for help. She was also the woman who had written letters for 15 years to the families of men from this neighborhood who deployed and came back changed, or who deployed and didn't come back at all. Not form letters, specific ones. The kind that named what the person had meant to the street, what they had been here, before they became something else somewhere else. Cole had never met Cecilia Drummond, but he knew, without being told, what kind of woman stood in a doorway with her hands on the frame, looking at a yellow notice being nailed to her own door. He pulled in. The contractor had finished and was walking to his truck when Cole got out. Nola was already at the front of the truck, not moving toward the contractor, not moving toward the house, standing with her head slightly forward and her weight distributed in the way that meant she was reading everything at once and had not yet decided where to put it. Cole walked to the porch. Cecilia looked at him. She looked at Nola. Something in her face shifted. Not relief, exactly, but the specific change that crosses a person's face when they have been alone with something for a long time and another human being has appeared. "You want to tell me what that says?" Cole asked. She looked at the yellow notice on her door. "I imagine it says what they've been saying," she said. "That I owe money I don't owe." Cole read the notice. It was an eviction filing on grounds of non-payment, a specific dollar amount in back rent, a court date set for 11 days out. He read it twice. Then he looked at Cecilia. "This is your house," he said. "Has been for 47 years, she said. She said it quietly, and she said it looking at his face, measuring him, the way people measure a stranger who has stopped to help, not ungrateful. Just honest about the fact that strangers stop for different reasons, and she had lived long enough to know the difference. "Come inside," she said. "It's too hot to stand out here and talk about it." Have you ever known someone like Cecilia? Someone who spent 40 years showing up for everyone else on their block, and who then found herself standing in a doorway, alone, watching her own door get posted? If that person is still in your life, go to them. If they're not, tell me their name in the comments. They deserve to be remembered. Inside, the house was everything the yellow notice was trying to erase. 47 years of a life arranged into a place that knew it was a home. Roosevelt's photograph was on the mantel. The kitchen smelled like something had been baked that morning. There were plants in the windows and a Bible on the end table with a bookmark that had been moved recently, and Nola went directly to the rug near the front door and lay down in the specific way of a dog who has decided this is where she lives now and is claiming the spot before anyone argues. The story came out in the patient, unhurried way that Cecilia Drummond told all stories, not because she was uncertain about it, but because she respected the telling enough to give it its proper time. 18 months ago, a property management company called Sovereign Home Partners had contacted her about her home. The pitch had been a sale-leaseback arrangement. She would sell the house to them at a fair price. They would manage the property. She would remain in the house as a tenant, with a fixed monthly rent and no more maintenance responsibilities. It had sounded, she said, like something designed for someone her age. She had asked her neighbor's son, who was a paralegal, to look at the documents. He had flagged 2 clauses he said were unusual but not disqualifying. She had signed. The rent for the first 6 months had been exactly what the contract said. Then, Sovereign Home Partners had restructured, merged with another entity, changed their business name, notified her by a letter that her account had been transferred to a new servicer called Coastal Property Holdings. The new servicer's first statement showed a balance owed from the prior 6 months that Cecilia had already paid. She had called. She had sent her bank records. She had written 2 letters. The balance had remained on her statement and grown with fees. Cole asked to see the documents. She brought them from a folder she had been keeping in the kitchen drawer, organized, dated, flagged with sticky notes in her careful handwriting. Because she had known, she said, that the day would come when she would need to show someone exactly what had happened. In exactly the order it had happened. Nola got up from the rug. She walked to the hallway that led to the back of the house, stopped in front of a door, and sat down without being told. Cole looked at Nola. He looked at Cecilia. "What's back there?" Cecilia was quiet for one beat. "Storage," she said. Then, more carefully, they sent a man to do an inspection in May. He left a lock on that door, said there were code violations, and the space was restricted until further notice. She reached toward the pocket of her housecoat and stopped. A reflex. Something she was reaching for that wasn't there. He also took my copy of the original sale agreement. Said he needed it for the file. Cole looked at the lock on the door. It was a contractor's padlock, the kind sold in hardware stores. He looked at the reached-for pocket. He did not say anything yet. He went back to the kitchen table and read the documents again, the original sale-leaseback agreement, the restructuring notice, the statements with the duplicate balance, Cecilia's letters, the responses that were not quite responses. He read all of it with the flat, systematic attention of a man who has spent 22 years reading the kind of documents that have consequences if you miss something. The deeper problem was visible on page 4 of the original agreement. A clause, written in the subparagraph of a subparagraph in language that the paralegal neighbor's son had flagged as unusual, gave Sovereign Home Partners the right to reclassify the property as a rental unit under a different regulatory framework if the tenant fell 90 days behind on payments. Under that reclassification, a 60-day eviction process could be initiated without standard homeowner protections. Cecilia had not fallen 90 days behind. Her bank records were meticulous, but Coastal Property Holdings' statements said she had. The records said what Coastal Properties needed them to say. Cole called a housing attorney named Vernell Okafor in Savannah, who answered on the third ring and listened for 4 minutes without interrupting, which told Cole he was talking to the right person. Vernell said the words predatory leaseback and manufactured default in the tone of a man who had seen this pattern before, had in fact filed against 2 similar operations in the past 3 years, both of which had targeted elderly homeowners in historically black neighborhoods in Chatham County. He said he could file for an emergency stay of the eviction and that the 11-day court date was workable if they moved that afternoon. The urgency had been present since the hammer. But what made it a different kind of urgent was what Cole found when he stepped outside to make the call to Vernell. A white sedan parked 2 houses down that he had not noticed on the way in because he had been focused on the contractor. It was still there. The engine was running. Cole was on the phone for 9 minutes, and the sedan did not move. He ended the call. He stood on the porch. He looked at the sedan. Nola had come out beside him, and she was looking at it too, with the quality of attention that was not quite aggressor mode, but was the register before it, the state of a dog who has identified something and is waiting to see what it does next. The sedan left when Cole took 1 step toward it. He went back inside. If you were standing on that porch right now, white sedan pulling away, 11 days on the clock, Cecilia's documents on the kitchen table, what would you have done next? Type yes or no below. I read every comment. Vernell filed the emergency stay that afternoon. He also called a colleague at the Georgia Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, a woman named Adriana Ferris, who had been building a case against Coastal Property Holdings for 7 months, and who said, when Vernell described Cecilia Drummond's documents, that what she had in her kitchen folder was the clearest paper trail she had seen in the investigation. Adriana drove from Atlanta the next morning. Cole was there when she arrived. Cecilia made coffee and set out cups, and sat at her own kitchen table with her folder in front of her, and answered every question in the careful, specific way of a woman who had been waiting 18 months to be asked. The men from Sovereign Home Partners and Coastal Property Holdings, two of them, a regional manager named Curtis Hale, and an attorney named Patrick Sewell, who did the company's eviction processing, came to West Bolton Street on a Friday morning. They had not been told that Vernell Okafor had filed a stay. They had not been told about Adriana Ferris. They had been told by a process server's notification that they were required to appear for an emergency hearing, and they had apparently decided that the most efficient response was to arrive at the property first and attempt to manage the occupants' expectations. Curtis Hale had a portfolio. Patrick Sewell had a briefcase. They knocked on the blue door, and Cole opened it. Nola was at Cole's left side, positioned forward, not lunging, not escalating, simply placed, with the weight of her body angled between the door and the woman sitting at the kitchen table 20 feet behind him. The sound that came out of her when Curtis Hale stepped through the door was low and unbroken, and it filled the hallway in a way that made Patrick Sewell, behind him, step back onto the porch and reassess. Curtis Hale looked at Nola. Nola looked at Curtis Hale with the flat and total attention of a dog who has made a decision that is not subject to revision. Vernell Okafor was at the kitchen table. Adriana Ferris was at the kitchen table. A woman named Paulette Washington, who was a deacon at First African Baptist Church and had known Cecilia for 30 years and had driven over at 6 that morning when Cole called because that was who she was, stood near the window with her arms folded in the specific way of a woman who has been watching over this street for a long time and is fully prepared to continue. And Cecilia Drummond sat at her own kitchen table in the house she had lived in for 47 years, with Roosevelt's photograph visible on the mantel from where she sat, and her folder in front of her, and her hands folded on top of it. Curtis Hale's voice had the practiced register of a man who has done this many times and has never had a room arrange itself like this one. He said there had been a billing error that was being corrected. He said the eviction filing had been premature and would be withdrawn. He said Coastal Property Holdings valued its relationship with its tenants. The room let him finish. Then Cecilia said, "Mr. Hale, he took my original contract." 6 words. Calm, looking at him directly, not with anger, with the specific weight of a woman who has waited 18 months to say a true thing to the face of the person who set it in motion. Curtis Hale looked at Patrick Sewell. Patrick Sewell was looking at Adriana Ferris, who was looking at him with the expression of a state investigator who has just heard the piece of testimony she needed. Cole spoke. Not the first time in the conversation. He had said nothing since opening the door, which was the point. The quality of his voice when he spoke was the one that had cost him nothing to develop, because it had always been there. The voice of a man who has spent 22 years in rooms where the facts need to be laid down carefully, because lives depend on what you do with them. He named the sale-leaseback agreement and the manufactured default clause and the duplicate balance statements and the 18 months of letters that had been answered without being answered. He named the padlock on the storage room door and the contract document that had been removed from the premises. He named the white sedan on Friday morning and the 9 minutes it had waited in front of the property. He named Adriana Ferris and the Georgia Attorney General's office and the investigation that had been running for 7 months and to which Cecilia's folder had just become the clearest piece of evidence in the file. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. Patrick Sewell said something to Curtis Hale that Cole did not hear. Curtis Hale put his portfolio under his arm. He looked at Nola, who had not moved, whose eyes had not left him for the duration of the conversation, and who did not move when he stepped back toward the door. He looked at Adriana Ferris, He looked at Cecilia. He left. Patrick Sewell left. Nola watched them through the window until their car was off the block. She turned from the window, walked to the kitchen table, and lay down at Cecilia's feet with the slow, deliberate weight of a dog who has finished one job and is starting the next one, which is to stay. Cecilia looked down at Nola. She put her hand on Nola's back. "Good girl," she said. She did not say it quietly. What happened in the weeks that followed moved through Kyler Brownville the way things move through neighborhoods that have always known how to organize. Through the church, through the block association, through the specific network of people who had been protected by Cecilia Drummond at one time or another, and who had been waiting for a way to return it. The emergency stay was granted. Coastal Property Holdings withdrew the eviction filing before the hearing date. Vernell Okafor filed suit to void the sale-leaseback agreement on grounds of predatory lending and fraud. Adriana Ferris's investigation, now fortified with Cecilia's folder, resulted in a consent order against both entities that included restitution provisions for 6 other homeowners in Chatham County who had been subjected to the same scheme. Curtis Hale and Patrick Sewell were not arrested that Friday. But what came after was worse for their business than handcuffs would have been. The padlock on the storage room door was cut off by Vernell's paralegal on a Tuesday afternoon, and what was inside was what Cecilia had said was inside. Storage. Her things. The items moved back from the access they'd had before the inspector came in May. The original sale agreement was not there, but Adriana had what she needed without it. First African Baptist Church on Montgomery Street held a community gathering the Sunday after the stay was granted. Paulette Washington organized it, which meant it was organized with the specific thoroughness of a woman who understands that a gathering is not a gathering until everyone who should be there has been called. People came who had lived on West Bolton Street for decades, and people came who had moved away and heard about it and drove back. There was food. There was music. Cecilia sat in the third pew where she had sat for 30 years, and the woman to her left and the woman to her right had both, at different points in the last 2 decades, received one of Cecilia's letters, the kind that named what their person had meant to the street before he became something else somewhere else. Neither of them said this out loud. They didn't have to. Cole drove back to Augusta in September. He drove the coastal road instead of the highway, because the highway was efficient and the coastal road was honest, and he was at a point in his life where honest was worth the extra hour. He thought about Cecilia's folder in the kitchen drawer, dated, organized, flagged with sticky notes, the record of a woman who had known that the day would come and had prepared for it anyway, alone, without certainty that anyone would ever arrive to read it. He thought about the letters she had written for 15 years to the families of men from this neighborhood. He thought about what it means to hold a place together by the sustained act of showing up for it, year after year, without a title or a salary or a guarantee that it would be reciprocated. He thought about Nola pressing her nose to the windshield on a street he had not planned to stop on. There are people in this world who have spent their whole lives being the person that other people call. Cecilia Drummond had been that person for 47 years. The fraud that came for her was designed around the specific vulnerability of someone who had done everything right, who had stayed, who had maintained, who had organized, who had paid every bill on time for 4 decades, and who had still found a yellow notice on her door one morning in August because someone had calculated that she would be alone when it arrived. She was not alone. Cole Briggs had the same August morning as anyone else on that road. He was heading north. Nola pressed her nose to the windshield. He turned into the driveway before he had decided to. He was already there. This story is for every person who has spent a lifetime holding their community together and then found themselves standing in their own doorway, holding nothing but a folder. And for anyone who has ever turned into a driveway without quite knowing why, and found out. Is there a Cecilia in your life? Someone who gave everything to their block, their church, their family, and who might be facing something alone right now? Tell me about them in the comments. I read every one. Every story on this channel is about arriving before it's too late. If that means something to you, subscribe, so you're here for the next one. There are more stories to tell. Which moment in this story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.